So first off, the presentation from myself. So once again, my name is Artūrs Lontons, and as I said, this not webinar, but this meetup will be focused on visualization. And I will start with talking about visualizing our problems in a third-party system. In this case, it'll be ServiceNow. So let's talk about integrating Zabbix with ServiceNow. So first off, why integrate, right? So maybe you already have an ongoing solution, right? Maybe you have ServiceNow or Jira Service Desk or something else in your environment. And you want to see Zabbix problems over there inside of that solution. You don't want to have both Zabbix and ServiceNow open. And that's one of the reasons. Zabbix is actually capable of automatically creating incidents in your ITSM system. You can then, on the Zabbix side, actually define assignees, some sort of grouping of these issues, add some extra details from Zabbix, right? Like maybe inventory information or something like that, that you'd have to otherwise populate manually. You can actually tell Zabbix, hey, create an issue in ServiceNow and add a lot of extra information, serial numbers, locations, things like that to the ticket. And maybe you can also automatically resolve those issues, right? If issue is recovered in Zabbix, resolve it in my help desk, ITSM, service desk system, and so on. So out of the box currently we are on version 5.4, waiting for 6.0 release, which is going to be soon. We have a vast selection of these integrations. They are based on webhooks. And if you have upgraded from previous versions, then they should be available on a Git page. You'll see a link below, because remember, if you are upgrading from an older version, we don't make any changes, in your templates or your media types. So you have to import them manually, but they're available for you. You can see there's a vast selection. There's Jira, there's MS Teams, there's Discord, there's ServiceNow. I couldn't fit all of it on a single screen. So there's, of course, much more going on. So we will use one of these. As I said, we will use the ServiceNow media type, developed by our team, fully supported by our team. We'll also modify it a bit just as a proof of concept. So you guys actually do kind of understand and do believe me that, yes, you can make some changes on your own actually and add some extra features to these media types. That's actually doable. So we'll be using 5.4. We'll be using ServiceNow Webhook, which is supported from 5.0 onwards. And I've done all of my testing for this here meetup on a fresh install of 5.4. If you have an older version, like I said, feel free to navigate to this Git page. Here it is. You will be able to see it in the slides once you receive them or once you see the recording. But also you can just Google Zabbix Git or just type in git.zabbix.com, and then you'll be able to navigate to this here project and download the template. Not the template, but the media type. It's under templates here. So let's open it up and let's take a look at how the media type actually looks. What are the contents of this media type? So first thing that we're going to see are a couple of parameters here. ServiceNow password, ServiceNow user, URL, and urgencies. And there will be a bunch more. Some of them are pre-populated. Some of them we'll have to populate ourselves. And it only makes sense that things such as username and password, we have to populate ourselves, because, hey, how can Zabbix team know what is your ServiceNow external API user username or password? So we'll have to populate these here two fields, right? And then you can also define urgencies within ServiceNow for different types of issues, for average severity, disaster severity, high, and so on. And then we can actually add custom fields. We can add custom fields, and usually the way we do this is we prefix them with U underscore and then the custom field name. And these fields can actually reference custom columns in your ServiceNow tables. But this will require tweaking the script a little bit. And at the end of this here presentation, I will show you how can we change the underlying JavaScript to actually utilize these here custom fields. But you can do so. This is very much supported. This is also discussed in our official documentation. And of course, for some of these, especially for custom fields, for some of these fields, especially custom ones, we'll populate the information with macros, either built-in macros or custom user macros, or a mix of both, just to make our information dynamic, right? Because over here, we're populating recovery date and recovery time probably. So it's going to dynamically provide us the time of the recovery of our problem. All right, next up, what we're going to see, so we have this list of parameters, right? And then next up, we're going to see these here checkboxes, process tags, and include event menu entry. This can be a bit confusing. If you're looking at this for the first time, right? This can be very much confusing. But what does it mean? This actually means that we are going to have, first off, a menu entry. This will look like this when we click on the problem. We will see this in a moment. And the entry will offer you to navigate to a URL. And the URL will be this here value. Over here, we are using a tag. Yes, a tag to populate the URL. In a moment, all of this will click together. And processing tags means that actually the webhook response is a JSON response. And we are going to process tags from that JSON response. We will look at it in a moment. So over here, by selecting the process tags checkbox, we are going to process the JSON. Here's an example of it as additional tags, right? And this is a part of our JavaScript that is responsible for it. So over here, we are saying that this here tag, Zabbix ServiceNow system ID, will be equal to the JSON response system ID. ServiceNow link will be a bit more complex. We'll take the ServiceNow URL parameter and then add the system ID from the JSON response. And then we'll have another tag, ServiceNow number, which will simply be response number. And they are grabbed from this here JSON. This is the webhook response. This is the response that Zabbix actually receives from ServiceNow once it tries to communicate with it. So here you can see we're processing this here system ID. This is one thing that we are processing, right? If I go back, I can see it. System ID, that will be one of our tags, and incident number, right? Over here, number. ServiceNow URL is a parameter in our script. If I scroll all the way back over here, ServiceNow URL, this one. This is going to be the URL. It's a value of the macro alert send to, which is a value of our media type send to field. All right, which we're going to look at in a moment. But for now, okay, so it's clear where we are getting these two, response system ID and response number. So we're getting them from the response. You can actually increase your debug level in Zabbix, right? And you can actually take a look at the response. You can play around with these webhooks and see what response do you receive. This is how I received this information. I just raised the debug level and looked at it. So, and how does this look after everything's been configured? So you can see we have a menu entry, right? We have a menu entry over here. And if we click on this here, menu entry, it will move us to the URL, to our ServiceNow URL, to this specific particular incident. And here on the right side, we can see all of the tags that have been grabbed from the JSON that we received as a response to our webhook request, and maybe some additional tags that I have defined on the trigger or on the host level. So we have configured our media type. Okay, that's good. Configured the parameters, configured the tags on the hosts, on the triggers, and so on. But we also need to not forget that we have to create a user or use an existing user and create a media of that media type on the user, right? So I need to create a media of type ServiceNow with the ServiceNow URL over here. And this is the ServiceNow URL. And if we go all the way back, and I'm going to scroll back a bit, this is actually the URL that will be placed here, alert sent to. This is the URL. It gets taken from the media on the user which receives this. And based on this URL, we actually built the link in the menu entry. ServiceNow URL plus incident ID, and then it kind of builds it into a URL that will move you to that particular incident. Okay, so we have our media type, we have our user, we have our media on the user, we have our JavaScript that we haven't modified in any way right now, but we will in a moment. Next up, we need to create an action with some conditions and some operations. And depending on the integration case of ServiceNow, for example, ServiceNow is capable of receiving problem alerts, recovery alerts, update alerts. Very much depends, once again, on how you tweak your JavaScript script, how you tweak your integration. You can restrict it to receive only some, but in case of ServiceNow, we are able to receive all three types of these event alerts. So what did I do for testing? So ServiceNow has this really great feature where you can get a free developer instance, and it works like a charm. You can select like one of the 3 different versions over there. I think I used Quebec or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. But there are different versions, and of course the UI will be different a bit depending on the version. That's sort of natural, but you can play around with this if you wish in the same way I did. This was completely free, which is really great from the ServiceNow side. Kudos, great for testing this. So I configured a couple of users, I configured the instance, and as you can see, the end result was I received alerts over here, incidents from Zabbix. The integration was working just fine. A couple of prerequisites that I had to define on the ServiceNow side. I had to define an API user with these here permissions, right? Once again, for some reason, I was actually able to receive these alerts even with incomplete permissions. The issues were created even if the user didn't have these permissions. But my initial guess is that this depends on the version, right? So the best practice would be simply to just assign these permissions so you're good to go with each and every version of ServiceNow. So the problem message gets displayed in the description field of the incident over here. We can see it. Once again, you can change it on the media type in the message templates. Feel free to just add whatever information you need over here. You can see this one looks to be resolved. And subsequent problem updates and recovery messages, they're actually also get displayed in the activity feed. So here's the activity feed, and I can see all of the updates. Here's the original problem, right at 9:26:48, and here's the recovery message. And the same with the update messages. If you acknowledge a problem or change the severity or something, they will also appear over here in the activity feed. All right, now let's do something custom. Let's change things up a little bit. So what if I wish to? It's a one-way integration, of course, but what if I wish to make it a bit more dynamic? What if I wish to use? What if I wish to make it like one and a kind of halfway integration where I can neatly navigate to Zabbix from this here incident? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to find a way to plop in the URL that leads to my Zabbix instance from the ServiceNow incident. And I'm going to create a Zabbix URL global user macro for this. That'll be my first step. And here you can see it, right? This is my local machine, which I can reach. This is the IP address of it. Of course, it's not publicly available, just a test instance. But that's the first step, create a URL. Next up, I used a very neat trick. I populated my message template for problem and problem recovery and update messages. I added the line incident URL, which contains the Zabbix URL, right? Then this is a static part of the URL that leads to trigger ID. This is a built-in macro, and event ID, which is also a built-in macro. So I combined static text with custom user macros and built-in macros. And this actually resolves, this works. This resolves as a URL that will lead me to this particular event in question. Really, really great. Right here, I can see it, incident URL in ServiceNow. Ian is asking in the chat, which version? If I'm not wrong, I think it was Quebec. The naming escapes me, but I think it was called Quebec. But the naming escapes me. I could be a bit wrong over here. Feel free to follow this here meetup, we'll have a blog post where I'll specify the exact version that was used. But right now, off the top of my head, I think it was Quebec. So incident URL over here, and I open it. And voila, I'm opening Zabbix, the issue in question, the event in question, and I can see it and I can follow it up. And we can actually get the same result. So there are two ways to do this, two ways to customize this. And I can get the same result by adding a new custom field in ServiceNow. In this case, it'll be user event URL over here. It's a new custom field. And I will create a new parameter for it in my ServiceNow media type, example user event URL, like so. And at the end of the day, it will look like this. The contents of the field will contain the URL. Over here, we can see it. To do this, I need to change the JavaScript a bit. I need to assign the value that gets returned in the JSON to this here field, right? So over here, here's an extra line that we need to add. And this way we can actually, so here we are adding some assignment group, right? An assignment group field over here. Assignment group, in this case, it's database. And in this way, you can add whatever else you wish. And this one will be based on tags, assignment group, event, tag, assignment group. And the result will be assignment group will be database taken from the tag of the event. And this way we can just populate everything. The main point that you need to know is you need to know your, over here, table field name, assignment group, and that's it. And this way you can specify things such as assignees, assignment groups, categories, event categories, or incident categories, location, serial numbers, whatever. The sky's the limit. You can add your own custom fields and add any custom information from tags, from events, from user macros, whatever you want can be pushed to your ITSM, help desk, or service desk system. So a couple of slides at the very end for troubleshooting, because I know these things have a tendency to go awry a bit at some point. So first off, let's not forget, as with all of our actions and all of our media types that we use in actions, we need to make sure that we have a ServiceNow user that has a proper media, ServiceNow media assigned to it. Otherwise, we'll see this error message, no media defined for user in our action log. And our media needs to have a proper ServiceNow URL, right? Remember when I was creating a media, I had the URL there that was used actually in menu entries. So we need to have it properly defined. Otherwise, we will get an error message like this, couldn't resolve a host name, or it could be some other message depending on how malformed the URL is. This is just an example where we couldn't resolve the host name. Make sure that the ServiceNow user and ServiceNow password are, of course, properly defined and you have the correct username and password. Otherwise, we'll get a 401 error, user not authenticated. And double check the API permissions. Like I said, on the version that I was using, I could actually get it to work with incomplete permissions, but I will still follow the official guidelines. Maybe I'll update to a later version at some point or use a different version somewhere else, and I'll need those exact permissions. They're there for a reason. So let's not forget to use them. So, and some final notes before we get to the Q&A. So the integration is one way. We can add the URL to make it sort of a 1.5-way integration, as I jokingly said before, but it's still a one-way integration, right? Changes that you make in ServiceNow by default will not be reflected in Zabbix. You will need to make changes on the ServiceNow side, make some extra scripting on the ServiceNow side for it to actually, utilize Zabbix API maybe and close an issue if you close it into ServiceNow. When you are performing some additional customizations, changing user roles, adding new fields and so on, and you're reading the ServiceNow documentation, remember that there are differences between ServiceNow versions that you are using. So make sure that you're referring to the correct version of ServiceNow. As I said, with the API permissions, for example, version A could have such set of permissions, version B could have something that's less strict. So be careful with it. And keep an eye out for Zabbix release notes. Chances are that maybe we'll add some extra functionality, extra features, improve performance, tune the JavaScript, and so on down the line. While not critical, it's still nice to follow these changes and upgrade them, because media types, they don't get upgraded automatically. So you have to read the release notes, then navigate to our Git page, download the file that contains this here integration, this here media type, and import it, and you are good to go. And that's it. Very simple. You can do the import from the Zabbix UI. It's quick. It's real quick and user-friendly. So you don't have to worry about it. And that's pretty much that. So let me quickly take a look at the Q&A section. Let's see if we have anything there. Right now, I'm not seeing any questions. As for the version, like I said, I think it was Quebec that I used. I'm not that familiar with ServiceNow kind of naming conventions. And I did this presentation a while ago, I'll be honest, but I think it was Quebec. Let's see, we do have a question. Sometimes getting false positive triggers for agent down. Any suggestions? So that's actually a good question when it comes to integrations in general. So I'm going to answer this on a broader scale a bit. So if your Zabbix floods you with 1,000 alerts per hour, say it's due to trigger misconfiguration, maybe, right? Or you just have way too many triggers that you don't even need. You just plugged in the templates without customizing them. Be sure to fix those issues. And it could be a performance issue. It could be a trigger misconfiguration. It could be that you're simply monitoring things that you don't need to. If you're getting false positives, once again, take a look at your trigger expressions. Take a look at your performance. Are your history syncers not too busy? Maybe they're 100% busy. Your history caches are full. And that's why you could be getting false alerts. Maybe you're not receiving data from your proxies in time. Try and resolve these issues first, as to not to get flooded. If you're forwarding everything to your ITSM system, you don't want to also overload it, right? So first sort out issues on the Zabbix side as to not overload your ServiceNow instance in this case. This could lower the trust, I guess, of your NOC team or whoever's responsible here, your service desk team. Just simply lower the trust in the alerting system at the end of the day if they get flooded with useless false alerts. Are you planning a two-way sync in the future? So two-way integration, yeah. Currently, I cannot really comment on that because that would actually involve us, making changes in ServiceNow itself. Like I said, the two-way integration will probably look something like when you close an issue in ServiceNow, you invoke Zabbix API, and then you close the issue via Zabbix API, for example. So that's a bit out of scope of Zabbix, but maybe I'm not leaving it out of the question that a community member or one of our engineers at some point might do a blog post, for example, for his own private project of how he did it. So within that scope, yeah, chances are maybe eventually, not saying no, but officially, my guess would be it's a bit outside of our scope. You indicated you use Zabbix 5.4. Do you think this will work with previous versions? So officially, the integration works starting from 5.0. If I'm not mistaken, either 5.0 or 4.4 was when we added webhook support. I'd have to look at documentation. But it will definitely work on 5.0. My guess would be that it will pretty much work just as it did on 5.4. Older versions officially not supported. Not even sure if we had webhooks back in 4.4. 5.0, you should be good to go.